Welcome everybody to the next edition of the Stay on Course podcast. Today I have Robert White, and he is an author, serial entrepreneur, and team trainer. Companies he founded and led have graduated 1.4 million participants in high impact experiential leadership training. He's been there and done that. And today we're going to talk about living an extraordinary life. We're going to talk about 3 ingredients that turn your dreams into reality. Welcome, Robert, to the Stay on Course podcast.
Julie, it's wonderful to be with you and your listeners.
Thank you so much. But Robert, before we get started, what is your favorite food?
Wow. Well, it is Japanese food. I have actually lived there a total of 14 years and traveled there. I'll be going there again this summer. So that's all part of that, I suppose. And I think it's just fabulous food. A close second recently for me is Indian food.
Oh, okay. Amazing. Robert, you said in your intro that you've been there and done that. Explain to me what that means.
Like you, Julie, I work with some amazing people that are talented, hardworking, focused, aligned, committed, all those catchphrases. And one of the things that I've learned from them, over the years, I've learned as much as whatever it is that I've offered. But, my focus goes back, many, many years, and has taken me a long time to kind of arrive at it. But it is around awareness, responsibility, and communication, to put it simply.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And those are the 3 ingredients for success, apparently, for building an extraordinary life. And so I want to dig into each one of these topics that you have today. And let's really talk about this. Let's get the audience thinking about how these ingredients are going to help them live an extraordinary life. And I want to know where you want to start the discussion.
My way of being with people, working with teams, working with senior executives is through stories where I've learned something. And some of them are about success I never dreamed of and accomplished. And some are in fact, some of, I think, the most clear and valuable aspects of what I've learned and what I can share come from failure. So that's kind of the background of all of that. It could be argued, should not have been as successful as I became. And what explains it, I believe, is I have had this wiring of feeling like I'm not enough and I need to learn more. Learn more from a book, from a video, from a podcast host like Julie, learn more from my experiences and really notice what's going on within me and outside of me and what I need to learn if I want to move to whatever my next step is.
Yeah, self-awareness and sort of understanding like where the gaps are in your understanding of things. That's part of the ingredient, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting because I think for me, part of the edge, I think it's an edge. When you have that self-awareness and you're constantly looking at like, what are the things that I need to fix in order to get to that next space? What are the gaps in my understanding? What else do I need to learn? And so, Robert, when I think about those things, I don't know, when you think about those things, if something's coming up, let me know. But one of the things that I always struggled with is conflict. How do I manage conflict in a graceful way? Because I hate conflict. I rather just avoid it. But, when you talk about self-awareness, like really thinking through what are the things that are stopping me from showing up as my best self. And there was one team specifically, Robert, and we'll go into storytelling here, that I worked with. And the team, the boss of this team happened to be extremely aggressive in her way she communicated. So every time we would get into a call, I would feel I had to put my punching my get my gloves out. I had to feel like I had to get my gloves out and protect and, make sure I had all my data right and this right and that right. And she would like nitpick these little things with me. And I would be like, oh my God, how do I deal with this person? So just building the awareness around that, right, helps you get to that next place because if you can conquer that, then you can like flow better on the team.
Well, one answer to that, I've done a short video on this, that the material comes right out of one of our trainings. But I believe, and I think we can make a solid argument for it, that life shows up as a series of events. One of those events shows up as conflict. And what I've learned over the years is you have 1,000 choices of what you do with it, but if you break it down to something simple, you can say that you either want to maintain whatever's behind that conflict, or you want to grow through it. But it's a choice. If you choose to continue to maintain it, what happens is that the conflict gets filtered through your system of beliefs, your attitudes, your habits, and your self-image, the way you are now. And what happens when that occurs, it usually happens under the level of awareness, under the level of consciousness. It's automatic. So if you take a look at the conflicts that you might have been in, you'll probably find a pattern there in terms of how you react. Some people go silent, some people get noisy, some people get angry, some people, there's all these different
Yeah.
possibilities. Some people change the subject. And I'm thinking of one specifically in my family where I did that, even though I teach this stuff, and I just made a horrible mistake because of my belief system about how my daughters are supposed to relate to me. So the other choice is to take a deep breath, that awareness piece that you mentioned, that I mentioned, uh, to take a deep breath and bring to mind your vision for that person or that situation or that company, their role in your life and how you want to see it turn out in its most positive, life affirming way. When you do that, you unleash maybe the single most powerful tool we have among the mammals, among the human uh, being, and that is our creativity. When you're focused on what you want to create, then the solutions start coming to you like crazy, and which is what I avoided and didn't let into my consciousness in that conflict with my daughter. And the negative aspects of that were long lasting. There's pieces of it still present years later. So
Wow.
so
Wow.
I'm answering the question, what do you want? Or because that's the question you should be asking yourself, or anybody with a conflict situation needs to be saying, what do I really want out of this?
This
Not
is
what are
great.
my traditional behaviors, my
Exactly.
traditional come from, but what do I really want? In the case with that conflict with my daughter, what do you want is the easiest question to answer. You know,
Yeah.
I want a relationship with her that's warm and accepting and exciting and filled with intelligence and filled with love. That's what I,
Yes.
that's what I really want. But what I triggered was my old stuff about being disregarded, about being not enough, about that secret fear that I found many of my clients have. Well, I'm pretty good at this and this and this, but I don't know how I am as a parent. And that fear or that belief system that was underlying all of that got triggered. And I made a fool of myself with someone that I love dearly.
Yeah. I'm
So
Robert, I'm
I,
still stuck on this one thing that you said. I'm like literally, you said something and I think I had an aha moment. And I hope, I don't know how deeply everybody's listening out there, but, when you said creativity, so conflict and creativity, there's something there that I haven't really thought about. And, it's interesting because when a problem arises in my life, most of the time, there's a couple things I don't really like to deal with, but most of the time I see it as an opportunity where when something goes wrong, because I just realized that I love to create solutions. I literally love it. So if we could just stay in the mindset and the attitude of creativity and curiosity through a conflict, we can come up with all the different opportunities to resolve it without taking it personally. I think what the problem is we're all triggered by our own emotional crap. We're all triggered by our trauma. All of us are.
Yeah.
And we're triggered at work, we're triggered at home, and we're just like sitting in a muck of our dysfunction. And if you haven't cleared out your childhood trauma or faced your childhood trauma, it's just going to keep triggering you, and you're going to keep having bad circumstances and situations. And I think the next thing we're going to talk about is communication. Communication is everything. So I just think that as we stay curious and stay in an attitude of creativity, if we could kind of flow in that momentum, which I know is kind of hard to do all the time, but especially in those moments where it feels heated, I think that's a great place to stay.
That it is the unique ability that we have. When they talk about the animal kingdom or the reptile kingdom or whoever, everybody other than human beings, quite often what comes up is that somebody has noticed how they have been able to be creative. The classic is the one of my favorite animals actually is the sea otter. That little
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
they're they're so playful and fun, and they just seem to be enjoying their life in the ocean. Uh, but they have learned how to break open a shell while laying on the surface. They put it on their belly and beat it until it breaks, and then they enjoy the morsel inside. We've seen the same thing with monkeys and apes. These animals that have a small touch of what we often take for granted, which is our ability to solve problems, and that comes from being creative. And it's a unique gift that God or the moon or the stars or genetics or wherever it came from. Uh,
Yeah.
Pick your favorite philosophy, for that one. But uh, it's an incredible ability we have, and often, particularly the kind of tension that tends to happen around uh, conflict, it gets shut down. And we don't rely on old patterns and old beliefs and old habits of
Yeah.
the way we've always done things.
Because we're triggered and we're not operating at our full capacity.
Yes.
It's interesting. I work with people that get on stages that share messages from the stage. And so there's three things that I know that trigger me for my fight or flight, the fight
I
or
can't
flight.
I can't wait.
I mean, it triggers me to be on, like, when I'm saying, okay, there's a difference between being triggered with the fight or flight, and there's a difference between dreading something. Okay. There's a difference. For me, there's a difference. But for me, I know fight or flight, that thing where your body starts shaking and you're going into that, reptilian like moment. It can be when I'm getting on a stage, right? If something goes wrong on the stage, I get like that moment, like, oh my God, I just lost my flow. I feel it then. I feel it in conflict.
Hmm.
And Robert, I feel it when I'm getting on an airplane.
Oh, interesting.
I don't like to fly.
Some past life experience or
I don't
whatever.
know what it is. I was in a bad car accident when I was a kid. I do know what it is. And I was a passenger. And so anytime I'm in a moving vehicle that I cannot, I'm much better off if I'm driving myself. It stayed with me, that physical, like, pain from having someone else drive me somewhere. It stayed with me. I probably need to work through that. But these things that trigger us, what it does is it puts us in a situation or a moment where we're not our best self. And you can't be creative and innovative and listening and empathizing when you're not your best self, right? So when we're in a conflict, we tend to not be our best self, right?
We actually physically contract.
Yeah.
We get more dense instead of more open.
Yeah. And like that doesn't help the conversation. That's why we have to hit the pause. Like they say, hit the pause button, come back and come, these hard conversations. And, Robert, it doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, you're always going to come up against this. It's like, when does it ever stop? You think like, oh, I'm going to like float through the next year without having to have a hard conversation. But I have not seen that happen in my life. Like I've seen it that there have been multiple times throughout the year or multiple times throughout the month that I have to have hard conversations.
Well, I have a client and who's become a friend and actually a resource to me. She works exclusively with women, and she works with them on the issues in life that she has successfully uh, transitioned through and learned to be successful around. Uh, she's got this amazing ability to do that, and I admire her greatly, actually. And so I've been working with her on her business and on uh, dealing with some of that stuff from the past that triggers her. And what I notice about her is that she practices something that I learned years ago from the late Zig Ziglar. Now, Zig Ziglar did not do transformational work, the kind of work that I do and my team does, but he was a fountain of knowledge and a dear friend, and I miss him actually. And one of the things he taught me was to have some rescue scripts,
Oh,
some things to say when you're up against it. You're trying to get a sale. You better have a few rescue scripts in selling. And when we apply it to conflict, you'll notice I quickly talked about taking a deep breath. Well, that's one of the rescue scripts that I've learned in working with powerful people is to take a deep breath and realize that where they're coming from, they almost always are a lot of the qualities that I think lead to success around commitment, around hard work, around being creative. There's many, many great qualities, and maybe they're not expressing that right now. So that expression, take a deep breath, different forms of it I've used constantly. Uh, how about that's an interesting point of view. I'd like to learn more about it.
mm,
Things like that, little quick things, because when you use them, it reminds you, first of all, to ask a question, not make a statement.
yeah.
Nothing amplifies conflict more than you taking a statement that it's odds with whatever your listener stands for, believes in, is asserting in the moment. Your curiosity stops that. First of all, it works for them. They find out that you really heard them and you've got some empathy. Uh, but secondly, it works for you. It gives you that opportunity to take a deep breath without being obvious about it.
Yeah. You
It's
know,
that step back.
I like that. I like that. Sometimes people want to tell you what to do or give you a lot of information. And one of the things that I have been saying is like, thank you so much for that perspective. I'll take it under advisement.
Yes, yes.
And then that's it. Like shut your mouth because like certain people I've learned that you just have to shut your mouth with. There is no there's no dialoguing with certain people, so you just kind of stop the madness and you say, "I'll take that under advisement. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you."
You
So,
know, Harvard study says that people in the small and medium-sized business segment spend around 70% of their time on people problems. drama that gets brought into their office that has nothing to do with their business and success and all of those things. And it's very real for the person that's experiencing it, and it gets dumped on the leader. So learning how to deal with that
Yeah.
and and to reduce, when you look at a schedule and do a little time and motion thing on yourself, if you're spending 70% of your time on people problems, you're not looking at strategy. You're not looking at results and what you're learning from them. You're not looking at what's next for your company.
Yeah.
Uh, you
And
know,
that's why part of the whole growth journey is for the leader to understand themselves.
yes,
This is the whole point right here. We're exactly what you're saying. The leader needs to learn about themselves. They need to do the growth work. And they need to set up the team for success so that their team can do the growth work and that people on the team can have good relationships. And the leader sets the way of all of that. So if our leader is dysfunctional, well, that dysfunction is also pulling out into the team. And it's not just about managing strategy and projects. It's about managing people. And so there's all these different like skill sets and capabilities the leader has to have. And the more growth work they do, the easier this gets.
one of my friendships in my life that I miss dearly is the late John Denver. Uh, John and I were close friends, and his death still has an effect, certain kind of effect on me. And it's a reminder because John was a learner and had a very high level of awareness. And John once shared with me that when he was he dropped out of college. He was studying to be an architect to pursue his singing ambition. And of course, like most fledgling musicians, he made no money and had to support himself. And one of the things he did was work a season on a logging crew up in the state of Washington. That dangerous, hard work of cutting down trees and getting them to market. Uh, and the one of the things I learned from him, when we traveled together, we had a lot of late nights. John would get up in front of 10,000 or 15,000 people, and when you get off at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, he was wide awake. And of course, I'm trying to go to sleep, but we had a lot of great conversations. And he shared with me about the distinction about log jams. And I've always thought it's such a good story for business people. It has been for me, certainly, because if you have a log jam, they still float those logs down rivers to the sea and export that wood. It's a big part of American industry. And but sometimes there's a turn in the river, there's a temporary barrier of some kind, and the logs jam up. Well, what do you do with that massive pile of these huge logs, and they're all tangled up and they're stopping the flow? If you think about business, a lot of things happen like that. You have a flow and something stops the flow. So
Mm.
what do you do with it? Well, what loggers do with it is only two things that they know what to do. Number one is dynamite. Somebody, runs out onto the log jam, plants a stick of dynamite, and they blow up the log jam, and it works. One thing that's a side effect, however, is toothpicks. Splinters. You ruin a lot of the wood with the dynamite, but it clears the log jam and you can get on with life. You've just lost a certain percentage of your wood. And I was saying to you that's an example of what happens in life and what happens in business is that if you blow things up, maybe with your authority, maybe with a threat, maybe with an argument, maybe everybody goes away feeling wounded and splintered. But it's a choice. The other
Yeah.
choice you have requires a lot more skill and requires that kind of taking a deep breath and being creative. And that is that somebody very skilled goes out onto the log jam and looks for the key log that's stopping the movement. Because at the beginning of every log jam is one log that gets crossways. Again, back to that, the analogy here, I think stands up. Any people problem that gets brought to you, underneath that there's a key log. something's going on for that person, and especially if it's going on such that they're bringing it to work,
Yeah.
and or bringing it to that environment, into that conversation with you. Uh, one of my sons went back to school after college for computer graphics back when that was a big deal. You wanted to learn about how to do things on a computer that none of us knew how to do. And today it's done so easily, especially with AI. But at that time, you had to really know your stuff. So he went back and did one of these 2-year programs on computer graphics, and he lived with me as a result. And I said, look, the room is free and the food is free and the use of my car is free when it's available, but you got to make your own spending money. So he had grown up in Japan, living with me while I was resident in Japan. He spoke fluent Japanese and he got a job in a Japanese restaurant. Now, I don't know about you, Julie, but I wrote a book. I have a lot of videos. I am kind of protective of my intellectual property, but to do that, I'm also quite mindful about other people's intellectual property, so I don't copy. And I didn't copy this, and I wish I would have. I wish I would have put that belief aside for a moment and copied it because it was so well done. He came home with his manual when he was going through orientation with a Japanese restaurant. And by the way, this worked out great for him because a blonde, blue-eyed American speaking perfect Japanese, including some very rude Japanese. Can you imagine the tips he got at a high-end Japanese restaurant that attracted, Japanese executives living in Colorado? But what this manual said when I read it, it was just brilliant. It basically said, stuff happens in your life. And when it happens, the key is to not bring it to work, you know. But it went in a lot better detail than I just told that story. But they said in a very practical way, they said, if you went out and had a lot of drinks last night and you're feeling terrible and you don't want to come to work today, number one, don't lie to us or to yourself. Call us and tell us you're under the weather. You can tell us as much or as little detail as you want. Just tell us you should not be at work today, and we'll find a solution. We'll find some, you know. And I
That's a
read
good
that,
one.
and I thought that's so realistic. It shows such wisdom, such deep knowledge,
Yeah,
actually.
it's a good one. So we've been talking about self-awareness and really about communication most of this time. What else do you want to talk about as far as living an extraordinary life?
Well, it is the structure of my book, which is titled "Thank You Very Much: Living an Extraordinary Life," but it's become a bestseller in 3 languages and two more this year.
Wow.
So it's become a big part of my life after avoiding writing it for 20 years. But the book is structured around those 3 words: awareness, responsibility, and communication. And when we talk about awareness, what we're talking about, my former wife had a kind of wisdom about this that I've always admired. She didn't use the word awareness. She talked about developing a higher state of noticing, to notice really what's going on for you, your physical sensations, your emotional reactions, your thinking, all of those things that make up a human being and that are not Groundhog Day. It's not like today is the same as yesterday and it's going to be the same tomorrow. No, it's to to notice,
Yeah, it's a good
to
word.
develop.
People can resonate with that word. Like it's much clearer than self-awareness. It sounds like
Yes.
self-awareness sounds a little ethereal, but when you say just notice,
Well,
notice when you're
it also sounds like some disease that you need to conquer and treat. You know, the awareness, self-awareness is overused and understood. Uh,
yeah.
But to just begin to notice, the one-liner is take a moment to smell the flowers, and what I'm talking about is take a moment to notice what's going on within you first. Uh, Secondly, notice what's going on with the people around you.
Yeah.
Notice that heaviness in their look when they come in the morning, or notice that their joy when their kid calls them at work. whatever it is. Just notice it. Uh, Wake up to that. Notice the environment that you're in because the environment does affect us a lot. And, our environment in the last 20 years has had a pace of change that is dizzying. Is that a word? Dizzying, ing. You know,
Maybe,
and
maybe.
it's chaotic, it's crazy, you
Yeah.
know, uh, it's crazy in a positive way. We can do things that we never thought we could do. This wonderful technology where you and I can have a face-to-face conversation over many miles, and kind of see what the other person is feeling and thinking. So notice your environment. In what's happening in your industry, what's happening in your own company that you're not hearing. What's the chatter at the coffee machine or at the bar on Friday night or whatever people kind of let go a little bit and share what they're really feeling and thinking. So noticing yourself, noticing others, noticing your environment, noticing what the flow is. Notice what's not working and tell the truth about that. Not from a standpoint of blame or shame or guilt, just information. What do
Yeah.
I need to know here? And also notice what's really working, and do more of it. So that's the awareness piece. On responsibility, look, I had a rough upbringing, abuse and poverty and all of those things that Lifetime movies are made about. Uh, and yet, I had an incredibly successful high school years. For one thing, in terms of awareness that came to me much later, I learned that my community took care of me when my parents didn't.
Hmm.
The institutions and people that somehow I created around me, or they were just there all the time, and I took advantage of them, helped me be successful. So I got this job in radio. I went from I am a severe introvert in terms of my wiring, and yeah, I went from being hidden to having the top 40 radio show in my area in northern Wisconsin. Uh, and I made more money than my father ever made when I was 17 years old. I was named the commencement speaker. I was named most likely to succeed. I got the scholarship to college. Everything was
Yeah.
working for me, and people knew who I was and said hi to me in the halls, even though I'm the kid wearing used clothing and from the wrong side of the tracks. Uh, it was a great experience. 10 years later, my life was a mess, an absolute mess. I had had 3 heart attacks. I had been told that I wasn't going to live past 35, daily chest pain, all of those things. I had a divorce, an early marriage, and a divorce. I felt horribly guilty about it and shared that with no one, but it weighed on me every day. And then finally, my little business was struggling. I was missing payroll some months, by a week or so, and just scrambling, all while pretending everything's fine. And a friend of mine went out to had a similar business and some similar problems, not the same, but just as big in some ways. He went out to California for one of the early human potential movement trainings, and he came back and he said, "You got to go to this training." And he's all lit up about it. He's just so enthusiastic about it. And the more excited he was about it, the more I resisted, of course. And the more I learned about it, the more I thought, this is crazy. This is California fruits and nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's not for me. And he finally brought that training to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I was living at the time. And I was in the first training in Wisconsin of a company called Mind Dynamics. And one of the things I learned there was something that I should have learned from my mother. Now, my mother was an angry, violent woman who apparently hated children, but she had a lot of them. And I was one of her targets. So, what I didn't notice is what she taught me about personal responsibility. My mother had been widowed 3 times. My father was her third husband, uh,
Wow.
who died when I was 14. I mean, the family joke is that it was her cooking. Uh, that's really rude, I know. But she was widowed 3 times. You know that in all of my years with her, I never heard her complain. She had a rough life, but she never complained. She was
Mm,
never the victim.
wow.
And I'm sitting in this training, this crazy California fruits and nuts training, and they're asking me to take a look at my victim status in the
Yeah.
world, about
Yes.
how all of the things that I can blame for my lack of progress. And so that started my learning about personal responsibility. It didn't clear up right away. There was a process after I left the training of noticing, by the way, in kind of a vivid way, how I was pushing away the people that I needed to attract. That's what my victim status brought to me. When I started owning my life, owning my response to anything that happened, including some success, but certainly anything that went wrong, that I owned it. I didn't blame anybody, including myself and including my mother, that I hadn't really learned that lesson. I hadn't learned that I learned it from her, not from
Yeah.
the training. My first teacher was her with her example of hard work, of taking personal responsibility. Now, she had a lot of demons and problems, but she was a pretty good model for success.
Yeah.
So the thing that I find in terms of a pattern is we're actually in a victim culture. If you start listening to the news, you're going to hear victim stories. The classic one about newspapers and the ink that they're printed on, increasingly that's not true, but that famous saying, when it bleeds, it leads. When
Yeah.
something is tragic and terrible, it's on the front page. When things are wonderful and all of the wonderful things that happen in life, you've got to dig to find them in any form of the media today. So
Yeah.
we're encouraged to be victims. So
We are.
taking
We are. Yes.
taking personal responsibility is that second key point in my book and in my life and in our teachings. And then finally, developing a mastery level of communication. We've got too much communication. We are assailed every day, particularly with there's this gadget that we have, this thing,
Yes.
that we look at all the time.
Yep.
And we're assailed with information. You can get lost scrolling through the internet, scrolling through chats, all of that stuff. But also on television, on radio, on people wanting to talk to us. We've got too much conversation, too much communication, and not enough that kind of gets through to us. So the key is to develop a mastery level of communication. And of course, that shows up as your speaking ability. You're talking about that being on stages thing. And but also a mastery level of listening, of learning to paraphrase, to feed back to people what they just said. The greatest single skill you could have, by the way, in creating better relationships is learning how to say, "Let me see if I understood you."
Yes. Yes.
You know,
Robert, this has been amazing. I just want to know, where can our audience find out more about you?
at extraordinarypeople.com. And if you go there, you can get a free subscription to my weekly e-zine called An Extraordinary Minute, an idea that I'm kind of interested in, my comments on it, but all designed to be read in 1 minute or less. It's like a little nutrition for the mind once a week. I've been doing it 17 years, and many thousands of people use it and keeps me in touch with them. I answer anybody that hits reply to that, I answer. A
Amazing.
question, a comment, a complaint, whatever gets my attention. Yeah, you'll also receive a 27 page, 28 page, maybe, PDF on success. It includes our 8 principles that underline all of our work, and I represent successful people anywhere. You get an opportunity to grade yourself on those 8 principles, and then learn some steps to start developing in any area where you're maybe less than as good as you need to be. But that's the way to contact me, and all my, it's Robert at extraordinarypeople.com, and reach out. Everything starts with relationships, I try to mirror that in my life. And you can get my book, a signed copy, or you can go on Amazon and all of those platforms, and or get it digitally with Kindle. So lots of ways to be in touch.
All right, Robert. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Stay on Course podcast.
It's been my great pleasure. Thank you, Julie.